Javion Thompson was 46 years old, and he had built everything with his own two hands. Not metaphorically, literally. He had poured concrete on job sites in the Georgia heat before he was 25. He had signed his first commercial contract before he was 30. And by the time he turned 40, Thompson Construction Group was handling major builds across the entire Atlanta metro area. Midtown, Buckhead, Alpharetta, down to College Park. His name meant something in this city. His word was a contract all by itself. He had a 16-year-old son named Jaden who looked just like him, tall, quiet, and careful with his words. He had an 11-year-old daughter named Zuri who still slept with a stuffed bear and called him Daddy like it was the most important word in the English language. And he had a wife named Aubrey, 42 years old, beautiful, sharp, polished, and, as he was about to discover, already gone long before she ever walked out the door. The night everything changed, Javion didn't shout. He didn't throw anything. He sat in the kitchen of their Buckhead home at 11:17 at night, under the low hum of the range hood light, holding a single printed sheet of paper so tightly his knuckles went pale. He had found it by accident, the way most devastating things are found. He'd opened the wrong kitchen drawer looking for a pen, and there it was, a printout from the home office printer dated 4.5 months earlier. An email Aubrey had sent to a friend. The subject line was blank. The first line read, "Z said I should prepare early." Javion read it twice. Then a third time. He set the paper flat on the counter and placed both hands beside it, like a man steadying himself before stepping off a ledge. On the table behind him, Aubrey's glass of red wine sat completely untouched. She had poured it before the argument started, and then, the way she always did when a conversation got uncomfortable, she had gathered her coat, her keys, and her composure and announced she was going to dinner. With Zion. Zion Reed, 31 years old, charming in the way that men are charming when they need something from you. Javion had met him twice at corporate networking events his wife had brought him to. He had come away both times thinking the young man had very good shoes and very little else. "I'll make it up to you later," she had said on her way out. She hadn't looked back when she said it. She said it the way you tell someone you'll return a borrowed book. Casual, obligatory. A minor inconvenience she'd get around to when she found the time. Javion had stood in the hallway and watched her reach for the door handle. Something cold moved through him. Not anger, not quite. Something slower and deeper than anger. "Aubrey?" His voice was quiet. "If you walk out that door tonight, everything changes. Forever." She turned halfway, gave him the smallest smile, the kind that had always made him feel foolish for worrying, and said it again. "I'll make it up to you later, Javion." The door closed with a sharp, clean click. He stood there a long moment, listening to her heels on the front walk, the sound of her car starting, the sound of it pulling away down the driveway and disappearing into the Atlanta night. Then he walked to the kitchen to look for a pen, and found something else entirely. He read the email again now, slowly. He read the part where she described feeling cornered. He read the part where she said the marriage was suffocating her ambitions. And then he read that line again, the one that sat in the pit of his stomach like a stone. Z said I should prepare early. Z. Zion Reed. The private account. The late nights on the balcony, phone pressed close, voice dropping low whenever he came near. The logistics bid that came in 2 months ago, with numbers so specific they could only have come from someone who had seen the other side's documentation. The pieces had been there all along, scattered across months of ordinary Tuesday evenings. He simply hadn't known yet what shape they made. He folded the paper once, placed it in the breast pocket of his shirt directly over his heart. Then he sat back down at the counter, set his phone face down, and stayed very still. Outside, rain had started to fall on the driveway, light and steady against the skylights, the way Atlanta rain sometimes falls in October, like it's in no particular hurry and it already knows how the night ends. The wine glass caught a small bead of light from the range hood. The house was completely silent, except for the rain. Javian Thompson sat in that silence for a long time. He did not spiral. He breathed in slowly through his nose and thought about his son asleep upstairs, that tall, quiet boy who noticed everything and said very little. He thought about his daughter curled up around her stuffed bear. He thought about what it had cost him to build this life, and what it would cost his children if he handled the next move wrong. He was a man who built things to last. He knew the difference between a wall that would stand and one that only looked like it would. He picked up his phone and he started making calls. Before we go any further, one question. If your son found that email in a kitchen drawer tonight, that single line, "Z said I should prepare early," what would you tell him to do? Drop one word in the comments right now. Stay or go. There's no wrong answer, but I think what you choose says everything about what you believe a good man is worth. There is a kind of grief that doesn't look like grief at all. It doesn't weep, it doesn't pace. It sits at a kitchen table at midnight and makes a list. It writes things down in a clear hand and reads them back without flinching. That was the kind of grief Javian Thompson carried into the days that followed. Quiet, organized, and absolutely certain of what had to be done. The first person he called was his older brother Darius. Darius Thompson was 50 years old, broad-shouldered, and had been running his own HVAC company out of Decatur for nearly 2 decades. He knew how businesses worked. He knew how marriages worked, too. He'd been through one difficult one himself and come out the other side with fewer illusions and considerably more wisdom. When Javian laid the printed email on Darius's kitchen table on Candler Road the next morning over coffee, his brother read it twice, set it down carefully, and looked up. "Don't blow this up," Darius said. "Think about the kids." "It's because I'm thinking about the kids," Javian replied, his voice exactly as level, "that I have to blow this up." Darius looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded, slow and deliberate, the way their father used to nod when a conversation had reached its conclusion. "All right," he said quietly. "Then do it right." Javian intended to. The morning after that conversation, before any other call was made, Javian was standing at the kitchen counter pouring his first cup of coffee when Zuri padded in from the hallway in her socked feet. Maurice the bear tucked under one arm, her expression carrying the careful weight of a child who has been thinking about something she hasn't said yet. She looked up at her father and said, quietly, "Daddy, why doesn't Mom come home anymore?" Javian set the coffee pot down. He crouched to her level, pulled her in close, and held her for a moment. Just held her, before he trusted his own voice enough to use it. "She's going through some things, baby," he said, rough at the edges. "But I'm not going anywhere. You hear me? I am not going anywhere." Zuri nodded against his shoulder. She held Maurice a little tighter. Javian stood up, steadied himself, and went to work. He was at the office of Marcus Ellison by 9 o'clock that morning. Marcus ran a private investigation firm out of a quiet suite in College Park, off Old National Highway. Second floor, nothing decorative about it, a nameplate on the door and a filing cabinet that had clearly survived several decades and probably one flood. But Marcus Ellison was former Atlanta PD, 15 years on the force, and everyone who knew anything about discreet, professional investigative work in the Atlanta metro area knew his name. Javian had the referral from his attorney within 20 minutes of their first phone call. Marcus poured 2 cups of coffee, black, no ceremony, and listened without interrupting while Javian laid out everything. The email, the name, the networking events, the pattern of late nights and long weekends that had been accumulating for the better part of a year. The logistics bid that had come in 2 months ago, with numbers too precise to be coincidence. When Javion finished, Marcus set down his cup and said simply, "Give me 5 days." Those 5 days changed everything Javion thought he understood about the situation. Zion Reed had a history, and not a short one. He had been sued for fraud in Charlotte, North Carolina 2 years earlier, over a real estate investment scheme that had left 3 business partners holding the debt, while Zion walked away with the settlement. The case had been resolved quietly, the way those cases are when the responsible party is persuasive enough to avoid a courtroom. Zion had come to Atlanta looking for his next opportunity, and Javion's wife had opened the door. What Marcus placed in front of Javion at their second meeting 5 days later was a financial record that made the affair secondary. $47,000, transferred out of a joint investment account in 3 separate movements over 6 months, all routed through a private account Aubrey had opened under her maiden name at a bank branch on Peachtree Road in Buckhead. 8,000 more had followed 2 weeks after that. $55,000 total. Gone. Javion stared out Marcus's office window at the construction site visible below. Steel beams, a crane turning slowly in the gray morning sky, men in hard hats working in the November cold, and said nothing for a full minute. Then, the logistics bids. Marcus looked at him. 4 months ago, Javion said, Zion's company submitted a bid on a warehouse distribution project in Clayton County, a project we had been positioning for 18 months. They came in with numbers that were specific. The kind of specific you can only produce if you've seen the other side's documentation. How much was the contract? Javion's jaw tightened. $2.8 million. Marcus wrote something in his notebook. Then he said, "Here's what the timeline tells us. The affair started 8 months ago. The financial move started 4.5 months in, right around the time Zion's fraud case in Charlotte was quietly settled and he needed a new source of capital. He didn't ask her for anything right away. He waited until she was committed. Then he asked." Javion absorbed that slowly. There was a difference between a wife who had fallen for someone and a wife who had been recruited by someone. He had needed to understand which one he was dealing with. Now he did. He remembered it clearly now, with the sharpness that hindsight provides without mercy. A Tuesday evening, about a month before that bid had closed. He had come home late and found his wife on the second-floor balcony, phone pressed close, her voice low and rapid. She had seen him through the glass door and turned away, angling her body toward the railing. He had told himself it was a work call. He had told himself a lot of things. "How do we prove the contract leak?" he asked. "She was registered as a vendor liaison on your company's communication platform during the bid process," Marcus said. "That means there's a server log. If she used that channel to pass information to Zion, or if he contacted her through it, the backups would still exist on TCG's private server. Your IT team can pull them." Javion looked at him steadily. "Then let's pull them." Marcus nodded. "One more thing. Do it right. Don't move until we have the complete picture." Those were exactly the words Darius had used. Javion almost smiled. That afternoon, he met with attorney Amina Okoro for the first time. Amina was 52 years old, had been practicing family law in Atlanta for 27 years, and listened to everything Javion laid out with the focused attention of someone who was already mentally assembling a case. When he finished, she looked at her notes and said exactly one thing. "We wait until the evidence is complete. Then we move all at once." That evening, he cooked dinner for the kids, Jaden's favorite, jerk chicken with rice and peas, which required more focused attention than Javion managed to give it. He burned one piece badly enough that Jaden gave him a long, measured look from across the counter that said without any words, "I know something is wrong with you, Dad." Javion just said, "Eat your chicken. Jaden did, without comment. Later, he checked on Zuri.
She was already in her pajamas, hunched over a spelling workbook with the concentrated intensity of someone who has decided this is the most important document she will ever complete.
Maurice watched from the pillow. Javian leaned in the doorway and watched his daughter chew her pencil eraser. He thought about what stability meant to an 11-year-old girl. Not luxury, not ambition, just the bone-deep security of knowing one parent would always be exactly where they said they would be. He pulled her door softly closed. Standing in the empty hallway, barely above a whisper. She doesn't deserve to lose her mother. But she also doesn't deserve a mother who sees her as an obstacle. He stood there one moment longer. Then he went downstairs and got back to work.
But what Marcus was about to uncover from that server log would turn a private betrayal into a very public reckoning. And Aubrey wouldn't see it coming until the moment it was placed on a courtroom table in front of a judge. There is a certain kind of silence that falls over a room when the truth arrives. Not loud, not dramatic, just suddenly, completely, irreversibly present. The way a door sounds when it closes on something that will never reopen. Aubrey Thompson was sitting at her desk on the 14th floor of a Midtown Atlanta office building on Peachtree Street Northeast at 11:40 on a Thursday morning when that silence arrived with the sound of a process server's footsteps in the hallway. She heard the knock before she saw him. The man was polite about it, they usually are. He stated his name. He asked for hers. Then he placed the envelope on her desk with a quiet, professional courtesy that managed to be one of the most devastating gestures of her adult life. Divorce petition. Fulton County Superior Court. Petitioner Javion Darnell Thompson. Her assistant was visible through the open doorway. 2 colleagues were visible through the glass partition, watching with the careful, studied neutrality of people who are absolutely paying attention. Aubrey stared at the envelope for 3 full seconds before picking it up with hands that were not quite steady. She made it to the women's restroom on the 14th floor with her composure still technically intact. She turned on the cold water and held her wrists under the tap, the way her mother had taught her to do when she was small and the world felt too large. She breathed. She focused on the hairline crack running from the upper corner of the mirror down toward her own reflection, a crack that maintenance had clearly been meaning to fix for a long time. She breathed again. And then, because Aubrey Thompson had never once in her adult life experienced a painful emotion without immediately recasting herself as its primary victim, she pulled out her phone and opened Instagram. Psychologists call this pattern DARVO: deny, attack, and reverse victim and offender. It is one of the most well-documented defense responses in cases of relational betrayal. The person who caused the harm reconstructs the story so quickly and so completely that they begin to genuinely believe their own version. Aubrey wasn't calculating when she opened that camera. She was protecting a self-image she could not afford to examine honestly. In her mind, she had already rewritten the narrative, and she needed an audience to confirm it. The Instagram video wasn't a lie she chose to tell. It was the story she genuinely needed to be true. She turned the camera on her own face, mascara just barely smearing, lips pressed together in a way she knew from long experience, photographed well as dignified suffering, and hit record. "I just want people to know," she said, voice calibrated to waver without breaking, "that being a woman in a marriage where you've given everything, your identity, your ambitions, yourself, and then get served papers at your workplace because your husband wants to control the narrative before you can tell yours, that is not strength. That is control. And I am done being controlled." She posted it without editing, 4 minutes start to finish. By 2 o'clock, the video had 11,000 views. By 5, the comments were running in her favor, until they weren't.
At 5:17, a verified business account posted beneath her video. Gerald Whitmore, one of the most respected commercial real estate developers in the Atlanta metro area, a man who had partnered with Thompson Construction Group on 3 major projects over 5 years. His comment read, "Javian Thompson is the most honorable man I have ever worked with in 23 years of construction in this city. Period." He said nothing else. He didn't need to. Within the hour, 2 more names appeared. A project manager from Alpharetta, a general contractor from Sandy Springs. Men who had stood beside Javian on July job sites in 100-degree heat, who had watched him arrive early and stay late, and keep every word he had ever given, without exception, without excuse, without asking for credit. Social psychologists describe this as reputational credibility under pressure. The idea that a person's character, accumulated over years through consistent behavior witnessed by many, becomes a form of social proof that no single narrative can easily override. Javian had never posted a single word about his marriage. He had never needed to. His reputation existed independently of anything Aubrey said, because it had been built through what he consistently did, not through what he claimed. She had mistaken her platform for power. What she did not understand was that Javian's standing in this city had nothing to do with a platform. It had been built one kept promise, one honest handshake, one difficult job completed on time at a stretch, long before any of this began. Aubrey watched the comments multiply from the parking garage on Spring Street, sitting in her car with the engine running and the heat turned all the way up because her hands still hadn't fully stopped shaking. She scrolled, and with each new name that appeared, something in her expression shifted. Not all at once, but in the slow, awful way that comprehension sometimes arrives when it has been coming for a long time, and you only notice it when the water is already at your knees. She had not expected him to fight like this. She had expected hurt. She had expected anger. She had prepared herself for loud and accusatory and emotionally messy. She had prepared a response for all of those things. She had not prepared herself for Gerald Whitmore. Her phone rang. She let it go. It rang again. She let that one go too. Then a text came from Latasha, a coworker of 3 years, a woman Aubrey had always privately considered someone with too little filter and too much memory, that read simply, "Hey, I need to tell you something. Call me." Aubrey called her. "I didn't want to say this at the office," Latasha said carefully, "but I saw you, with that younger guy, at the Marriott near Hartsfield last month. I was there for my cousin's wedding block." A pause. "I didn't say anything because it wasn't my business. But Aubrey, it's going to become your business now." The call lasted 45 seconds. Aubrey sat in that parking garage for another 20 minutes after it ended. Outside, Atlanta moved through its ordinary Thursday evening. Taxis, foot traffic, the distant cadence of the 5 Points train, completely indifferent to the fact that everything she had spent 8 months building was coming apart at every seam simultaneously. She called Zion. 4 rings, voicemail. She called again, voicemail. She texted, "I need you, tonight." The screen showed, delivered. Then nothing. She stared at that word, delivered, for a long time. In the quiet of that parking garage, with the heat running and the city just outside the concrete walls, something shifted behind Aubrey Thompson's eyes. Not quite remorse, not yet, but the first cold edge of recognition that the person she had moved money for, shared confidential information with, built weekend plans around, and staked 18 years of marriage against, had just sent her to voicemail. Twice. Across town, in the parking lot of a hardware store on Buford Highway, Javian Thompson sat in his truck. His phone was face down on the passenger seat. In his hands was a 4x6 photograph he had slipped from the frame on the kitchen counter that morning before leaving the house. Jaden and Zuri at Stone Mountain, maybe 3 years ago. Jaden had his arm around his sister's shoulders. Zuri was laughing so hard she was squinting, her whole face given over to it. Both of them mid-motion, neither aware of the camera. The kind of photograph that only happens when no one is performing for it. Javian looked at it for a long time. Then he placed it carefully in his breast pocket, same pocket where the email had been, and rested his head back against the headrest. His eyes closed. His jaw worked once, quietly, against something he didn't put a name to. He was not a man who cried easily or often. But in that parking lot, in the fading October light, with the court date less than 24 hours away, he allowed himself to be, just for a few minutes, exactly what he was. A man who was terrified of losing everything he had spent his life building. Then he sat up straight, he picked up his phone, and he called Amina Okoro. The morning of that court date would deliver a moment so precise, so devastating, that it would silence an entire courtroom, and neither Aubrey nor Zion had seen it coming. Fulton County Superior Court sits on Pryor Street Southwest in downtown Atlanta, a building that has witnessed more of this city's grief and reckoning than most people will ever see from the outside. Javian arrived early, as he arrived everywhere, quietly, without ceremony, already composed. He wore a dark charcoal suit pressed the night before, and his tie was the deep navy one Jaden had given him for Father's Day 3 years ago. A detail no one in that courtroom would ever know, but that Javian felt the weight of throughout the entire morning. He sat beside Amina Okoro at the plaintiff's table, with his hands folded and his breathing steady, and he did not look at his wife. Aubrey sat at the respondent's table in a cream-colored blazer, flanked by her attorney. She had come prepared, or at least, she had come dressed for the version of these proceedings she had imagined. The version where 18 years of marriage had diminished her quietly, and she had bravely chosen herself. She had prepared statements. She had rehearsed composure. She had not prepared for Amina Okoro. Amina laid out the financial evidence without theater and without a raised voice. The private account under Aubrey's maiden name. The $55,000 moved in 3 transfers over 6 months. The routing numbers. The documented timeline. Each piece placed on the table like a stone, plain, flat, and permanent. The courtroom went very quiet. Aubrey's attorney objected where he could. Judge Sandra Reeves, compact, precise, 14 years on the Fulton County Family Court bench, sustained some and overruled others with the efficient economy of a woman whose sole interest is what can be proven. Then Amina said, "Your Honor, I'd like to enter Exhibit F, a voice message recorded by the respondent, recovered from TCG's vendor communication platform." She paused to address the technical foundation directly. During the bid process for the Clayton County Warehouse project, Zion Reed was registered as a vendor contact on Thompson Construction Group's internal communication system. This is standard procedure for all active bid participants. What Mr. Reed did not know was that all communications on that platform were automatically backed up to TCG's private server. When Mr. Thompson's IT team conducted a forensic audit of shared vendor accounts, the backup was recovered in full and authenticated by a certified digital forensics technician. Aubrey's hands, folded on the table in front of her, tightened. Amina clicked play. "Hey, so listen, once that warehouse thing goes through with the stuff I sent you, we're good. We can actually do Charlotte. I'll handle him. He'll think the kids are just visiting on weekends. It's fine. Just close it first, okay? Call me back." 41 seconds. Casual, slightly rushed, unmistakably Aubrey's voice. The informal, pressured voice of someone who believes completely that she is not being recorded. The silence that followed filled the room from the floor up. A woman seated in the gallery behind Javian made a sound that was barely a word. "Oh my God." Amina continued without pausing. "Additionally, Your Honor, the respondent had researched private school enrollment options in Charlotte, North Carolina, for both minor children and made 2 direct phone inquiries to a residential real estate agent in the Dilworth neighborhood of Charlotte. Under Georgia Code Section 19-9-3, the attempted relocation of both minor children to another state without the petitioner's knowledge or prior court authorization constitutes grounds for restricted parental access." She placed a second document on the table. The financial fraud and the attempted relocation were not separate events. They were a coordinated plan. Judge Reeves set down her reading glasses. She looked at Aubrey for a long, measured moment. Aubrey held the judge's gaze for exactly 1 second, then fixed her eyes on the table. When Judge Reeves spoke, she chose each word with the precision of a woman who rarely editorializes, and means it fully when she does. The court finds that the respondent's conduct demonstrates a sustained pattern of prioritizing personal interests over the welfare and stability of the minor children. The attempted unauthorized relocation alone warrants the custody arrangement this court is about to impose. She paused. "Mrs. Thompson, what this court has heard today is not simply a record of marital betrayal. It is a record of a parent who treated her own children's future as a variable in a private transaction." No outburst followed, no dramatic gasp. Just a stillness that settled over the room like something heavy had been placed down and would not be lifted again. Researchers who study long-term relational betrayal describe a specific pattern called instrumental deception, where a partner constructs an entire parallel reality, not merely to avoid conflict, but to extract material value. Aubrey had shared proprietary contract information. She had moved marital assets into a hidden account. And most critically, she had made logistical plans to relocate 2 children to another state, and had already calculated how she would manage Javian's reaction afterward. She had not thought of Jaden and Zuri as people who would be affected. She had factored them in as part of the plan. That is the precise line researchers draw between a mistake and a deliberate choice. In a court of law, and in the court of every person listening, that distinction carries everything. From any outside vantage point, what makes this story most painful is not the betrayal itself, it is the reason for it. Aubrey did not leave for love. Zion Reed would prove that clearly enough. She left and risked her children's stability in the process for the feeling of being newly chosen. Psychologists call this limerence, an involuntary attachment that is chemically intense, emotionally consuming, and in nearly every documented case, temporary. The tragedy is not that Aubrey felt it. The tragedy is what she was willing to dismantle while she did. The ruling that followed was precise and complete. Javian Thompson received primary physical custody of both Jaden and Zuri, with final decision-making authority over their education, health care, and welfare. Aubrey was granted a structured visitation schedule, subject to a 90-day review pending the outcome of the contempt proceeding related to the attempted unauthorized relocation. She was further ordered to repay the full $55,000 plus court costs within 180 days. Javian did not look across the aisle when the ruling was read. He sat still while Amina touched his arm briefly and said something near his ear that the room couldn't hear. He nodded once. He was still at the plaintiff's table when Aubrey stood and gathered her things, clicking her pen, closing her portfolio, straightening her blazer with the mechanical precision of someone running entirely on procedure because emotion had overwhelmed everything else. She did not look at Javian. He looked at her once, briefly, from the side. Not with satisfaction, not with anger. Just the quiet, clear-eyed look of a man who sees exactly what is in front of him and has made his peace with it. Then he looked straight ahead. Out in the hallway, while Amina spoke with the court clerk, Javian stood near the tall window overlooking Pryor Street. The city moved below. Traffic, pedestrians, a food cart doing steady lunchtime business on the corner. Ordinary life, continuous and indifferent, the way it always is. He put his hand in his jacket pocket and felt the photograph still there. He thought about Charlotte, about school enrollment records, about real estate calls made from an Atlanta area code while he was on job sites managing other people's futures, completely unaware of what was being arranged with his. He thought about the woman he had married at 28, and the fact that somewhere in all of her planning, she had genuinely believed she could manage his reaction afterward. "I'll make it up to you later." He stood at that window for a long moment. Then he placed the photograph back in his pocket, straightened his tie, Navy, Father's Day, 3 years ago, and walked down the hallway toward the elevator, toward the parking garage, and toward everything that came next. What Javian didn't know yet was that the woman who had tried to take everything from him was about to discover that the man she had chosen over him had never once intended to stay. The Instagram video disappeared 3 days after Aubrey posted it. She deleted it without comment. Her employer had called. 2 clients had forwarded screenshots with questions, and Zion Reed had still not returned a single message, not one, across 3 days of calls and texts that showed delivered and nothing else. Time does a particular thing after a courtroom. It doesn't sprint. It doesn't stand still. It moves forward the way rivers move, without asking, without pausing for anyone to catch their breath, carrying everything along whether you are ready or not. For Javion Thompson, the 8 months that followed the Fulton County ruling were precisely that, a river. Some stretches calm, some stretches cold, but always moving, always forward. He had moved with the kids into a house in Brookhaven, on one of the quiet, tree-lined streets not far from Oglethorpe University, where neighbors wave when you pull into your driveway, and the Saturday morning air still smells like someone nearby is mowing their lawn. The house was smaller than the Buckhead home, deliberately so. Every piece of furniture chosen for use, every drawer organized the way he organized his job sites, simply, without waste. Jaden, 17 now, carrying his height with the easy confidence of a young man who has stopped bracing for things, had a room at the end of the hall, with a drafting table large enough to hold the architectural sketches that had begun appearing on every flat surface in the house. One evening over dinner, he had told Javion, quietly and without ceremony, that he was thinking about architecture school. Javion had listened with the expression of a man receiving very good news he is trying not to show is very good news. He had ordered the drafting table that same evening. Zuri had painted her room yellow, a very specific yellow she had pointed to in a paint swatch book and described as the color of Grandma's kitchen. 2 coats, 1 full Saturday, most of which she had spent in an oversized shirt, directing her father on the sections he was missing. Maurice the bear had observed from the windowsill with the composed authority of a very senior official who has seen everything and has opinions about all of it. Thompson Construction Group had not paused for any of it. The work continued, a commercial development near the Beltline in Atlanta's West End, a warehouse project in Forest Park running on schedule, referrals coming in from names Javion had spent years earning the right to call on. His brother Darius had come by the new house one Saturday morning, stayed for coffee, left without saying much. For Darius, that meant he thought everything was going to be all right. The first repayment installment, part of the court-ordered $55,000, had arrived by wire transfer 6 weeks after the ruling, processed through Aubrey's attorney's office, without a note. Javion had looked at the bank confirmation for a moment, then filed it without comment. He was reviewing project estimates in his office on a Tuesday afternoon when his phone rang with a North Carolina area code he didn't recognize. He almost let it go. He answered on the 4th ring. It was Aubrey. Her voice was careful, not the careful of someone managing a presentation, but the careful of someone walking across ground they are not sure will hold. She asked if he would meet her, just to talk. She understood if he said no. He agreed to meet her the following Saturday at Piedmont Park, near the benches by the Aquatic Center, late morning, before the weekend crowds got heavy. He told himself he was agreeing because she was still his children's mother, and that fact did not change simply because he wished it would. He was right about that. It didn't make the drive there any easier. She was already on the bench when he arrived, sitting straight-backed in a dark coat he didn't recognize, with the stillness of someone who has rehearsed what she wants to say and is no longer confident any of it will come out right. She looked thinner. She looked like someone who had not slept well in a long time and had become skilled at concealing it. She looked, in a word, like the accumulated weight of her own choices. Javian felt no satisfaction in that. He simply noted it, the way he noted conditions on a job site, accurately, without embellishment. He sat down, not close, not far. Civil distance. "I know you don't want to hear this," Aubrey said, "but I'm sorry." Javian looked at the park. A couple was walking a dog along the path near the fountain. A child was running ahead of her parents, shrieking with the kind of uncomplicated joy that belongs only to people for whom the world is still reliably soft. "He blocked me," Aubrey said. Her voice didn't break, but it came close. "Right after the papers were served. He said..." She stopped, breathed. "He said, 'You're not valuable anymore.' Just like that. Like I was a listing he'd taken off the market." Javian said nothing. "I need to ask you one thing." She folded her hands in her lap and kept her eyes on the path rather than on him. "Did he ever actually care about me? Any of it? Do you think any of it was real?" The question sat between them in the fall air. Javian looked at his former wife for a long moment. He took in the tired line of her jaw, the way she was holding herself together with considerable effort, the genuine bewilderment of a woman who had gambled everything on a man who had only ever seen her as a means to an end. He thought about the answer she was hoping for. He thought about what it would cost him to give her one she hadn't earned. "You chose who to trust," he said finally. His voice was not unkind, but it was final. "Now you have to live with that choice." He stood. He buttoned his coat. He looked at the park one last time. The dog walker, the laughing child, the ordinary, beautiful Saturday morning of it all. He stopped once at the edge of the path, near the fountain, where a father was lifting a small child up onto his shoulders. The child grabbed the man's ears with both hands and laughed with everything she had. Javian watched them for one moment. Then he kept walking. What he walked toward that afternoon had been waiting for him exactly where he had left it, and no one had been able to touch it. There is a wall inside the Thompson Construction Group workshop on the ground floor of their operations facility off Fulton Industrial Boulevard in Atlanta. Plain concrete, 12 inches thick, poured in a single August day 17 years ago when Javian was 29, when the company had 3 employees and a rented forklift, and one contract just barely large enough to prove he wasn't imagining all of this. He had mixed and poured that wall himself alongside his crew in the kind of heat that makes the air shimmer off the asphalt. He remembered the exact day. He remembered the way the concrete had looked setting in the form, gray, immediate, and permanent. He ran his hand along it now on a quiet Sunday afternoon, the workshop empty around him, the city outside moving through its weekend without him. The wall had not changed. Everything else had changed, and the wall had not. He didn't stay long. What he needed was waiting in Brookhaven. 2 weeks earlier, he had bought paint, clean, bright white, for the wooden fence along the back of the property. It had been on the project list since they moved in. He had told the kids that this Saturday was fence day. Jaden had said, "Okay," in the flat, affectionate way teenagers agree to things they intend to actually show up for. Zuri had immediately asked if she could have her own brush. She had her own brush. They were out there in the fading afternoon, Jaden working methodically along the lower rail, Zuri covering roughly 30% of the fence with paint and 60% of her left forearm. Maurice stationed on the porch railing in his capacity as official observer. The old transistor radio from the garage was playing something easy through the back door. The amber light of late October fell across all three of them, warm, unhurried, and complete in the way that certain ordinary moments are complete without ever announcing it. Javian picked up the third brush from beside the paint can. He walked over and took the section between his children without saying a word. Zuri glanced up, grinned without breaking stride, and went back to work with the focused intensity of someone who has a very specific artistic vision and will not be rushed. Jaden painted beside him in the easy, companionable quiet that had always existed between father and son. Two people who understood each other well enough to stand shoulder to shoulder, do the work, and not need to explain why it mattered. The fence stretched out ahead of them, bright white in the evening light. The radio played on. This story reminds us of something most of us already know, but rarely say out loud at the kitchen table. When you have loved someone for a long time and that love was not returned with the same care, the pain doesn't announce itself. It settles into your Tuesday evenings. It follows you to the grocery store and stands quietly in the cereal aisle while you try to remember why you walked in. If that is where you are tonight, pull out a piece of paper, not your phone, and write down one thing you did today that required no one's approval. Maybe you deadheaded the roses before the rain came. Maybe you made the bed on a Wednesday, quietly, just because you always have. That is the evidence of who you are when no one is watching. Javian Thompson never needed a courtroom to tell him his life had value. He already knew. In every kept promise, every early morning, every honest handshake over 20 years of work done right. The people who love you without condition already know the same thing about you. Write it down tonight. 3 sentences, no more. That has always been enough. Written by a human. AI is merely a companion. This story was born to spread hope. Kindness doesn't need to be grand, only sincere, and life will always find a way to repay those who dare to be kind amid countless injustices.